Hi guys, it's Doolio. This is my first voiced video and I thought this could be a good opportunity for me to talk about a certain subject in the art world that's being constantly overlooked. I think it's a very important subject. It's a talk about a certain set of difficulties or certain self-doubt that most artists, I'd say over 95% of them, face at certain points of their artistic journey. And even when this subject is being touched upon, I'm finding that the advice given is usually pretty damaging, in my opinion. So let's get into it. As the title says, the subject is about an artist who's wondering whether they are an artist. So basically, what do I mean by this? When I say this, I don't think about the notion of wondering whether you're good enough, because that is a completely different question. So maybe I'm a bad artist, but I am an artist nevertheless. So that's easily answered. I understand the mental and emotional strain thinking you're not good enough puts on you, and I will talk about this in some other video. But you are an artist, and that's not really a hard question to answer. I also don't think about, am I an artist in some romantic, poetic sense? Like thinking that if you're an artist, you have to feel a special way, or you have to be kind of unique in whatever aspect you think an artist should be unique in. No, I don't think about that. It's also pretty simple. Like, if you do art, you're an artist. If you're engaged actively in the art world, you're an artist pretty much. So that's a pretty technical question, yet people like to think about it if it was some ideological type of question. What I'm thinking about in particular is this self-doubt that arises from the fact that an artist can't keep up with their practicing schedule. When they find they're avoiding their art practice, when they find their schedule, isn't met, maybe they even have a messed up sleep schedule, or maybe they're skipping days or even weeks or even months. So let's take a look at some of these hurdles that might present themselves to an artist. So for example, we can have procrastination. So you're delaying your art practice in favor of some other things that maybe are less important to you, yet you kind of constantly find excuses for you, and you are ending up not practicing when you should, and delaying, and maybe even skipping it for that day or week or whatever. Then we have laziness. So you feel this tremendous lack of will once you sit down to practice. And we have schedule issues. You can't maintain your schedule. You find your schedule too hard, even though in some objective sense maybe it's not that hard, so that leaves you wondering. Then we have an issue of feeling really drowsy or tired or sleepy when finally sitting down to practice. We have fear of blank canvas, so-called fear of blank canvas. We don't experience it as literal fear, but it's psychologically it is fear. So we experience it as this kind of being put off by starting a piece. When we start, it kind of flows really well, but we are capable of staring at the blank canvas for a long time and feeling this kind of uneasiness maybe. The opposite of that might be the fear of finishing your pieces. You have like 12 started pieces, and yet you didn't finish any of them, and you're already kind of ogling that 13th piece you might start but not finish, right? This is also a kind of a psychological problem. Maybe you're tense to even practice. Maybe you have this really kind of micro decision type of problem where you literally are having these second thoughts about drawing a line. It can go as diminutive as that sounds. That's also psychological. You can suddenly feel jolt of energy to do anything else but practice drawing. Maybe you have some TV show you haven't watched and your friend is constantly pestering you about it, and yet you've been successfully avoiding it for years, but now you suddenly want to binge watch it like 4 seasons at once in like 20 hours, just so you wouldn't keep up with your art practice. So, when I lay down on all these like this, it's not really strange for an artist who faces several of all of these to ask themselves, wait, what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm not an artist. It's a pretty logical conclusion. If I were an artist, I would probably be happy about practice. And even if lots of things about that practice are technical and, chore-like, I would still be able to get over that because I'm so invested into art. Art is what drives me, and so on and so forth. And that's clearly not the case. So maybe I'm deluding myself. Maybe I just kinda imagined this drive for art in some, let's say, pursuit of escapism or something. I needed something, then I latched on to art for who knows whatever reason, but deep down it's not for me. And long story short, the answer to this question is almost always yes, you are an artist, you aren't deluding yourself, you shouldn't give up on becoming an artist, a professional artist or a hobbyist or whatever your goal is. And I will try to talk about why am I insisting on this answer being positive regardless of who asks it. And I will try to kind of talk about this in the video. Let's start with the notion of you avoiding art practice. So there are a couple of elements here that are showing that you aren't actually disinterested in art. First off, when we avoid these things in such inexplicable manners, it usually means there's some fear involved there and we don't want to experience it. Maybe we're not aware of that fear, but we would like to avoid the fear that's being associated with the activity. So let me give you a relatable example. So for example, we have Johnny. Johnny is in high school, he has a crush on Sally. Johnny isn't exactly a social weasel, a party monster. He isn't some kind of Don Juan or anything like that. Johnny is maybe shy, maybe he's too self-aware, maybe Johnny has, problems with insecurity or something. Like basically majority of people do. So Johnny has a huge crush on Sally. Johnny is in love with Sally. But there are great fears involved here. So for example, if Johnny were to approach Sally, ask her out, or confess to her, whatever, Sally might reject him. There's a fear of rejection. There's a fear of public performance. Even though, we have only one member in the audience, that member is really important and their opinion is really important to us. So we have this fear of public performance. We have the fear of failure as well, because his goal is to successfully, be with Sally. His goal is for Sally to like him and so on. So failing to meet this goal is, a failure. Why are these fears so scary to us? Why is this scary to us in the first place? Well, we can say it's a remnant from the older times. All these fears have their roots in fear of death, which is kind of outdated in current society to an extent, but certainly outdated when it comes to Johnny's position. You see, Johnny could be rejected by millions of Sallys, and maybe he can end up being sad or something, but he wouldn't die. But imagine if Johnny was rejected by all of his 30 tribe members of his tribe. He would be probably ostracized or sent away, and he'd live for about 3 days until something eats him. And this is ingrained, this is kind of embedded in our emotions and thought process, in our mind basically. So when we face rejection, we might get even panicky, we might experience some serious fight or flight reflex and so on. So that's why Johnny is like, maybe I shouldn't ask her out. It's the same with fear of public performance. It's the same of fear of failure. We kind of imagine these, at the core of these is some extreme failure. And extreme failure in, 10,000 years ago meant certain death. So we are avoiding these types of decisions or situations. We are kind of emotionally avoiding them in order to save ourselves from this pressure, even though rationally we know that, if we told a dumb joke and no one laughed and then we left home, nothing really happened. We don't have some kind of threatening issue there. But it's how our mind works. It's some legacy that will probably, maybe, will be weeded out, in a couple thousand years. Maybe it shouldn't be weeded out, and so on. But okay, if these fears are, strong enough, threatening enough, Johnny might employ a different strategy to protect himself. And that is being disinterested, avoiding the situation without realizing the fear. Because we really dislike fear. But we also dislike other things, such as shame or embarrassment, being ridiculed, and so on. Of course, these are, closely knit together. But I'm talking about sense of shame Johnny might feel if he found out that he is that much scared of that potential situation. He might be embarrassed that he's weak. He might be disillusioned in himself, something like that. And that is also a strong feeling, and that is also something we want to avoid. So our mind wants to protect us from, not only from the situation, but from us realizing that there's so much fear there. So it brings us disinterest on the plate, and we lap it up because it's cozy. It's a good choice. It's a better choice than the truth. This doesn't mean Johnny is lying to himself consciously. Johnny passes all lie detector tests. When people ask him, "Are you interested in Sally?" and he's like, "Nah, I don't know, maybe not." He's passing the lie detector test. Deep down he isn't, but he's not aware of that. So Johnny might think Sally is kind of dumb or boring. Johnny might be like, "Oh, her friends are so shallow. She's probably shallow as well." Even though he'd give his all this moment just to be with her. Maybe Johnny's friend could be like, "Hey man, tomorrow there's a party and Sally will be there, and Sally doesn't know many people there. So, maybe you could show her around, wink wink." And Johnny could be like, "Yeah man, I don't know, Sally's kinda boring, right? She kinda looks good and she's kinda charismatic, yeah, but I don't think she would be a good fit for me. And party, you say? Party, I'm not much of a party goer. In fact, I think I'm an introvert, I didn't know that until today, but yeah, today I found out I'm an introvert. I like to, sit home and drink tea or something. And I know those parties, there's a lot of hip-hop music there, and I'm a huge metalhead. I also didn't know that until today, but hey, you learn something every day. So, Johnny is bringing up these excuses, but he's kind of genuine in them. He doesn't see them as such. So, in order to protect himself from the realization that he's so much scared of talking to Sally, or a potential outcome of talking to Sally, he will put Sally and the whole situation into a folder, called disinterest or things to avoid or something like that. But there are telltale signs that Johnny really likes Sally. For example, he feels butterflies in his stomach when she's near, and he kind of daydreams about them being together, then he brushes that off, and so on and so forth. He's actually really occupied with thoughts and emotions regarding Sally, but yeah, deep down his mind is playing tricks on him. And this parallel exists with artists as well. with artists who face these troubles, and vast majority of them do. You see, if you were disinterested in doing art, actually disinterested, you would just not do it. I know that sounds overly simplified, but that is actually the case. You wouldn't have these issues that you're facing if you weren't an artist, or if you weren't meant to be an artist, whatever that means. You know what I mean. Let's see the other side of your engagement. So you are following a bunch of artists on social media. You are mesmerized by their art. You are actively following them, maybe you're commenting on their art. You follow art happenings in general. You talk to people, maybe online, maybe you have some friends and so on, who are artists or who are aspiring artists. You talk to them about art. You recognize the usage of art in media. For example, maybe you see some lighting in some movie and deduce how that lighting is used with this effect or that effect and so on. You scroll through your social media feed and bask in some really good art. You follow your favorite artists on several platforms. Not only that, you daydream about your own art. You fantasize about you publishing a graphic novel, making a visual novel, making an art book, drawing a comic, people liking your art and all that. Maybe you have like 70% of the scenario of your visual novel written. Maybe you have characters fleshed out and so on and so forth. That's not all of it. Maybe if you are kind of deeper into the whole thing, maybe you have tutorials downloaded, browsed, checked out. Maybe you have paid tutorials. Maybe you have art programs. Maybe you have brushes or whatever. Things that cost money. Maybe you're looking for some art schools. Maybe you know a bunch of them. Maybe you know online courses and so on and so forth. That's a lot of resources spent on something that you apparently don't really care about. You're not fooling anyone. You should be an artist. The reason for you avoiding your art practice is because your mind deems it as dangerous or scary, threatening in some way. Similar to Johnny's case, that might be fear of failure. Art and Sally are kinda similar in a lot of ways, actually. It can be fear of failure. My art won't be good enough. When I try, everyone will see that I'm a fraud or something. We are talking about unconscious strings of thoughts and emotions here. So, if you rolled your eyes when I said this in the sense that, wait, that's too basic, I know that I need to practice and so on. I'm not talking about that. I know that you're perfectly capable of assessing the need to practice and the need to suck for a long time and so on in your head. What I'm talking about is, like in Johnny's situation, something that doesn't come across your mind. Maybe it does. It's better if it does, because then you can take it head on. If it doesn't, you will just feel lazy or kind of anxious about doing art. You will skip practice, you will sleep in and so on. Art and Sally are similar. We have fear of failure. We have fear of public performance. Hey, sometime I will put my art somewhere. Maybe I'll upload it online. Maybe I'll hang it in some gallery on my exhibition or whatever. And people will look at it and people will, some may like it, some will dislike it. What will the ratio be? What would people say? Maybe they'll attack me and so on and so forth. Again, I'm talking about some underlying unconscious stream of worries. So these are closely tied together. Art has some other factors, doing art has some other factors as well. Art is kind of inherently dangerous. Art is very expressive activity and also a very exploratory ability. There's a lot of self-exploration going on in a spontaneous sense. Again, I'm talking about, underlying current of exploration. This has nothing to do with the theme of your drawings or, the style and the design and whatever branch of art you chose. Like maybe you're drawing cars, maybe you're drawing people, maybe you're drawing landscapes, maybe you're a concept artist, illustrator, and so on and so forth. But all of these allow for very exploratory things to happen. you can find out something about yourself, maybe you fear what you might find. I'm talking about a single line giving you glimpse into something through association. I'm not talking about you drawing a truck and realizing that you want to drive a truck. It's not that simple. But let's not go into the nitty-gritty, because this video could be like 10 hours long and really boring. Let's just say that actively doing art is in itself a minefield that our mind wants to protect us from. Maybe there's nothing there, but maybe our mind wants to protect us from some potential harm. I don't know. But art in general is kind of a scary endeavor to us, because who knows what we might find or draw and so on. And this can be seen in all these variants, in all these strategies we employ in order to avoid our art practice, because those are typical coping mechanisms, or rather defense mechanisms, defense strategies that people employ when there's some threat in some activity or some thought process, in activity or thought process or reaction, etc. First, we have procrastination and laziness, not the same, kind of tied together. Procrastination, we kind of delay what we want to do or need to do in favor of other less important things, or maybe we find them less boring and so on. This is a really typical mechanism for avoiding things. We avoid things basically because there's some threat in them. Laziness is also a defensive mechanism, a really typical one. And through colloquial usage and, as an insult, as a description of a person and so on, people started to use it as some kind of personality trait, right? Well, it's not that. Laziness is just a mechanism that wants to prevent us from engaging into something potentially dangerous. So laziness is a really typical defensive mechanism. We kind of remove the will from something that's threatening. We remove our will to go towards that or do that, and then we're like, okay, we're safe. We're not going to do that. As I said, this isn't a personality trait, and we can check this with looking at a lazy person. Let's see Johnny's example. So Johnny, with all that we've said, might employ this interest and laziness into all this. He might weave in all this stuff in order to avoid facing Sally, because maybe then he should do something and maybe he'll be guilt-ridden if he doesn't and so on. So better not engage at all. And that might come off as laziness, for example. Maybe his friend who asked him, invited him to a party, maybe he's like, man, Johnny is such a lazy guy, he can't go to a party that's like 100 yards from his house. I mean, and even the girl he likes is there. He likes to drink tea at his home. Man, that's peak laziness. I know this is really simple, but just going with simple examples. And to Johnny as well, this might seem as laziness. Like, I really can't be bothered to go to that party. Man, when I think about, putting on those clothes and going there and then, going back, walking, and it will be cold in the night and I will be sleepy and so on and so forth. So he's lazy, right? But wait, what if his friend from his pen and paper D&D group invites him for a weekly session that's like 10 miles away and it's snowing and everything, and then asks him to, buy some drinks and food on the way? And then Johnny goes like, yeah, sure, man. Oh man, I almost forgot about you guys. Yeah, I'm coming. And then Johnny suddenly runs through the snow for 10 miles just to, go to a D&D session. What's happening here? Well, D&D session is something really cozy, comfortable, familiar. There's no danger there. He's engaging in a very escapist activity. Not only it's comfortable and harmless, it's also a place where Johnny can escape from that nagging feeling. And that nagging feeling might be something like, hey man, go to the party, ask Sally out, what are you doing? Maybe that's some nagging feeling that hasn't formed itself clearly in his consciousness, but he kind of feels it and he kind of doesn't feel okay. But this can erase it, because Johnny can become a level 18 cleric for a few hours, and that's very valuable. So now suddenly Johnny, the lazy man, is, doing a 10-mile running record through the snow. And this is always the case with someone being lazy. If you were, let's say, lazy as a character, as a person, you would also ask for someone to drive you to that D&D session. And there's always something that you can see with person's behavior that kind of rules out the whole lazy as a personality trait thing. And while you might say, well, we also feel lazy about things that we don't like to do, and not lazy about things that we want to do. Well, Johnny's example kind of tells us that doesn't have to be the case necessarily, and that's the whole point. Johnny is avoiding something that he would like to do much more than, having that D&D session. And what points to that is Johnny's butterflies and his daydreaming and so on and so forth, and he's thinking about Sally all the time and that kind of stuff. And this is kind of analogous to an artist thinking about art, browsing art, googling art, talking about art. Maybe they're going to exhibitions on foot and all that, while actually not being able to actively practice art, even though they really want to. They know they want to. They're fantasizing about their graphic novel all the time or whatever, but they kind of don't want to. And I know practicing art is a chore oftentimes, and I'm not going to deny that. Let's not sugarcoat everything. A bit of a digression here. I don't like when people sugarcoat that, because I think it leaves beginner artists unprepared for how much work there is in art. But that's a topic for another video maybe. Another thing important for art as a tool of expression or self-exploration is that art basically comes from a place of inner turmoil. Now that might sound too epic, but let's just observe it as a birthplace of art, not as something too romantic or too epic. It might be a small rift, a sense of not being whole or something. You want to fill some gap, you want to do some exploring, find some answers and so on. So you engaged in art. If your personality is such that your mind wants to mend that with art, you are going to be drawn to art. In other words, art life chooses you, you don't choose art life. I know many people dislike this, but that's what I think. That's my educated guess based on a bunch of criteria. You are drawn to art, you feel it as some urge. It's not just kind of let's do art, like, let's eat ice cream or whatever. Art is very unique form of self-expression and self-exploration. And why do I say that it's internal turmoil? Now you might say, hey Doolio, but wait, what if you're really calm and content, perfectly content person? Why wouldn't you want to kind of do art just, to entertain yourself or something? That's rarely the case. If you are a perfectly content, calm person, you're probably going to lie in a hammock somewhere and doze off. That turmoil, again, you don't have to observe it as something negative. Embrace it. Rather observe it as something positive, as in, hey, I mend my rifts, and we all have those rifts. We don't always know what they are, but we all have them. That's kind of an inevitability, psychological inevitability in our development. Hey, I mend my rifts through art. Isn't that awesome, right? I like that I use art. Art is a beautiful thing, really constructive. That's cool. So, I use my internal discrepancies or whatever to do something beautiful. That's really cool. I'm glad that I'm an artist. Observe it that way. Now, that doesn't mean, when I say rift, again, I want to stress this enough. It doesn't mean every artist is Van Gogh levels of this rift. As we all know how he ended up. Poor Van Gogh had to paint like 500 paintings in 5 years or something like that. I forgot, but you know, he was extremely fruitful when it comes to his work. That's that urge, and even that didn't help him. He had too many, let's say, or too big of a rift or something. He was mentally unwell, but he felt this urge in the same way all of us do. Now, depending on your personality, circumstances, your answers to those internal turmoil or repressed things or something, of course, majority of artists aren't going to end up like Van Gogh, or aren't even really going to be depressed or you know, tragic as he was. Or maybe Caravaggio. Caravaggio killed a man, if I know correctly, and he was a notorious drunk. He also had this urge to do art, and it was really kind of overwhelming, similar to Van Gogh. On the other hand, maybe you have some really shrewd, mercantile, commercial, rational, and efficient concept artist superstar guy, right? That guy also started doing art from the same fundamental reason Van Gogh did, right? It's just that their personalities are vastly different, and maybe the strength of that turmoil is also different. That doesn't mean this rockstar concept artist guy is not of the same, let's say, artistic tissue as Van Gogh. You know, he is, but he is different within that. So to kind of strengthen this argument, let me ask you this. If that guy is so mercantile, simple, shrewd, efficient, and so on, what is he doing pursuing art in the first place? Why isn't he somewhere on the market manipulating stocks or something? No, there's something that, you know, made the art life choose him, right? Because you absolutely don't choose to do art because of because if you want to get rich or you want to get famous or something. No one would choose art. I mean, you can get rich and famous, but art is hardly the optimal, you know, option for that. So obviously these aren't the things that interest this guy primarily. His selection wasn't random or accidental. He was compelled. Maybe we can observe it like that. He was compelled. He felt an urge to do art. It's an urge. It's not some really laid back choice or something. And this urge of self-exploration, of you know, exploring your own mind, your own consciousness, or maybe expressing yourself, that's all an urge. You feel the urge to explore, or you feel the urge to express yourself. Imagine that if you know something no one else knows, that would be constantly overwhelming. You would be like, I want to shout something on top of my lungs, right? And this is the same thing. You are shouting something, maybe to yourself, maybe to others, but there's some underlying current of emotions or psychological content that makes you do it. And at the same time, that is a dangerous minefield. So that's the place where this kind of almost paradoxical relationship with art comes from. So we are drawn by art. We want to do it. We are not only drawn by art as a passive connoisseur or something. We are drawn by art as an active artist. We want to do art. We want to produce art. We want to make art, show it to others, and so on. Show it to ourselves, see us progress, and so on. Yet, whenever we come close, we feel this kind of force field that wants us to go back. And this is the game of cat and mouse. At the beginning, I mentioned how this topic isn't talked about a lot, and when it is, I see a lot of damaging advice. Now I would like to talk about that, and then we'll wrap it up. The reason this topic isn't talked about is because people in general observe it as a very simple example of getting one's act together, or of someone being inherently lazy or something. That's not the case, as I hope I showed throughout this video. So they aren't giving it giving it much thought. They're like, man, just sit down and work. If you can't, I mean, maybe you shouldn't. This is a mistake because it's very common for even great artists to experience these issues all the time. And these issues can be very overwhelming due to the very nature of art. So it's not about them not being fit for the profession's requirements, but rather about them still fighting against these very common hurdles. So rather than them being unfit, we should look at them still fighting with this, still fighting, and they shouldn't give up. A lot of high-profile artists, professionals, and so on, when they're asked about these dynamics, they simply reply with something like, okay, you should deal with that, I get it, but you should deal with that, and if you really can't, then maybe art isn't for you. And this is a key mistake, I think, because art isn't meant for you, or you aren't meant to be an artist, is kind of a classification, it's kind of a qualification, right, of a person. And I think that person is definitely an artist precisely because they're facing those hurdles. So this kind of can mess up an impressionable beginner artist who might be like, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't be experiencing this, if I'm an artist, so maybe I'm not, maybe this is a fad, okay, this will pass, I'm sorry for intrusions, goodbye, thanks for clearing this out for me. I, on the other hand, don't see it as a question of if, but a question of when. So I get the reasoning behind this harsh advice, of course. At the glance, it seems very logical, for one. Two, intent behind it is good. Don't waste your time. You will find yourself lost without income or maybe without sense of who knows what when you're older and so on. So that's why I'm not criticizing those artists too much, because it would be a great responsibility to just send someone to an art journey and tell them, no, you are an artist, just go for it. And that someone just ends up trying to do art for 10 years and then facing life with no income or experience or something like that, right? So people are, pretty varied when it comes to giving this type of advice. But I think this other advice is more damaging. I never met an artist who regretted the decision to become an artist, but I met many people who regret their decision to stop pursuing art. And this is a fact. And I think if you think about it, that might be the same experience you had. Have you met an artist who is regretting that decision? And on the other hand, have you met someone who is regretting the decision to stop pursuing art? So in practicality, this is also a question of nuance. Of course, we can't just dismiss the real world and be like, oh man, I'm an artist, let me become an artist, I'm trying, man. That's also really irresponsible. But everything is nuance. I'm not saying do nothing and try to become an artist and then 30 years down the line, it starts going slowly. No. And then you die of hunger or something. No, I'm not saying that. If needed, take a break. If needed, take a different approach. Hell, if needed, finish some college in some other field. Go to a job while still working on your pursuit of art. I know people like this. Some of my best friends, including me. I'm not a really strong example of this because I haven't actually finished a college in other field. I finished college in this field, but my friends, some of my friends and a lot of people I know actually finished schooling for other fields, went to work in other fields, did jobs and so on, and then returned back to art. As a matter of fact, one of my best friends is a concept artist, and he has he's an engineer. And when he finished college, he returned back to art. And while he was on college, he was doing art and practicing. Now, your mileage may vary, and your reasons and your decisions may vary. He, for whatever reason, had to finish or felt like he had to finish a different college in a different field and then come back to art. And it worked out pretty well for him. You know, he has a plan B that might be stronger than his plan A, right? But everyone has their own story to tell. So to that I say, don't ever give up. Don't lose track of reality, but don't give up. I hope that this video alleviated some of the worries you had. I hope that you got some kind of insight and some kind of, weaponry to deal with these things. I hope I dissuaded some of you from stopping practicing art, from feeling disillusioned, and I hope you will continue on this path while, of course, dealing with reality at the same time, as tough as that might sound. Now, I would like you to tell me what did you think about this video? Was it cool? Was it awful? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? And, if you like my time-lapse videos and hate my voice or whatever, you can always mute the video, let it play at faster speed, and enjoy. So until the next one, goodbye.